that's part of the problem.
Right.
Is people look at management and think that they're, this is where failed developers go to die. And it's really not the case. And as a
People
matter
really
of
do
fact,
think this? Is this actually a sentiment amongst a lot of like, nah, man, you put on a suit, bro. Hello, everyone. My name is Lee Ngo, and welcome to Educative Sessions, a podcast series with people in the developer world about their coding experiences. This is powered by Educative, which makes it easy for authors to provide interactive and adaptive courses for software developers. My guest today is Ted Neward, who is the Director of Technology Culture with Quicken Loans. And today we're going to hear about his story of going from being a very happy developer, at least he thought, into the manager role. Ted, welcome to the show.
Thanks. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So let's start, way back to the beginning. I want to actually understand a little bit more about your life and your coding days. So, what was coding like when you first discovered it? And how did you eventually decide to go into it as a career?
Well, I mean, if we go back that far to when I first discovered coding, I was, I think, 7 years old when my dad brought home an Apple II Plus with 48K of RAM and dual floppy drives.
That's all you need.
Right?
That
He splurged dual floppy drives. And, there were a number of games that came with the Apple at the time, written in AppleSoft Basic. And one of the things that my father decided, and I'm not quite sure where the impetus was for him, but he actually decided that he was going to learn AppleSoft Basic so that he could teach classes at the computer shop where we bought it in exchange for credit at the store, right? He kind of worked out a barter swap deal.
Okay.
And so I went with him to these programming classes and I learned AppleSoft Basic alongside, the other students who were taking the class. And that, in many respects, was my introduction to programming that would be a hobby for a number of years until I got into college. And I was sitting with a couple of friends of mine, roommates, and we were actually doing some C++ and Windows at the time on building a game. And one of my roommates noticed that there was an open position in town working for a non-university affiliated company. And he said, hey, I think, Ted, you should interview for this job. And I was like, oh, come on. Those are professionals. We're just fooling around. He's like, fine. And then Lee, he did something absolutely, completely unthinkable. He double dog dared me to go and, I mean, seriously, right? I mean, who does that? Who does that to a friend?
That really escalates things, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. But then I had to go and do this. And so I went and interviewed, didn't get the job, but was actually out of 40 candidates, was one of 4 finalists.
Nice.
And realized that my playing around with it was actually doing, in many cases, what a lot of people were paying a lot of money to go to various colleges and so forth to learn. I was learning it as I go. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what got me kicked off into the programming space was, I just did it because I enjoyed it. So obviously a lot of my early programming experience was fun, right? It was, in many cases, I was building applications that I wouldn't have built if I had just had, time on my hands. But the act of creating something out of nothing was really, really exciting. And I remember the very first real quote unquote professional job that I had was actually working for Mike Cohn, who is now Mountain Goat Software and really big in the Scrum space. And I remember sitting in Mike's office and he was talking about how, his own journey. I had gone from developer and was now going into management. I remember sitting there and looking at Mike and thinking, no way, that's never going to be me. I'm never going to be non-technical. Mm-hmm. And of course, now, Mike and I, we've each gone off and gotten into the speaking thing, and we run into each other periodically at conferences and whatnot. Yeah. And we have a laugh over the fact that now I'm, director, management, et cetera, et cetera. Right. Because it is, I would not have thought I would be here, but I am here. And what's more, I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I want to be. It is, in fact, it's a labor of love. Yeah. And, Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
shameful thing to admit. No, it's really
I mean,
not. It's really not.
it is, and yet you're here. You're right. but
Well, I think that's
but
part of the problem
right, right.
is people look at management and think that they're, this is where failed developers go to die. And it's really not the case. And as a
People
matter
really
of
do think
fact,
this. Is this actually a sentiment amongst a lot of like, nah, man, you put on a
oh yeah,
suit, bro. Like that's
oh,
actually a thing amongst coders.
coders, if you were to get 20 coders in a room,
Uh-huh.
which means, by the way, you better have a lot of pizza, by the way.
That's true.
If you were to get 20 coders in a room and ask them this question, I think 18 of them would tell you, yeah, I have no desire to go into management whatsoever. I cannot imagine being a manager, being a leader. I can't imagine having to deal with all those problems, and in many cases, most of the ones that do go there because they feel like that's the only path available to them to move up the corporate ladder.
Right.
And, if you get a good one, your team will remember it for life, in the same way that I remember Mike very, very fondly. If you get a bad one, it'll scar you forever. And most of them are middling. And it's like, yeah, I don't want to be just average, particularly considering as a developer, I'm frequently thought of as one of the smartest people in the room. So that's, I think, part of what is behind that desire to kind of stay out of the management track, despite some of the benefits that it can really have.
Right, right. This has been fascinating, but I want to but what was the catalyst for you, right? Because there was some moment, whether it was a meeting or a conversation or something, where you knew that your path was about to divulge. Like what diverge, I should say.
So it was a couple of different things, right? Number one, after I became a developer, I actually started writing some books and doing the speaking thing and getting, doing that thought leadership thing, became an architect. And, so did that relatively early in my career, and kind of woke up to the realization that, particularly as a consultant, right, people often glamour the idea that, as a consultant, you're going to come in here, you're going to tell everybody how to do it right, and they're all just going to go and do it because they're paying you, the consultant, a ridiculous crap ton of money. Mm-hmm. It doesn't exactly work that way. You're an advisor. You're not really a decider. Mm-hmm. And I kind of got to a point where it's like, I don't want to just be standing here shouting into a hurricane, because there are so many cases where it's like, look, I can see such a good path for the company. If you'll just trust me, take this path. This is what will lead to good things. And they wouldn't, or they couldn't, or they just chose not to, or whatever. And so that gets a little frustrating. The other thing was, very bluntly, I was spending a lot of time in airplanes. And I realized that if I wanted to see my kids before they left the house, I probably needed to find something that wouldn't require quite so much travel. And so I started doing more of the, looking into the startup scene around here, particularly because in many respects, my long-term goal has always been to, in many ways, emulate my grandfather, who was a very successful injection molding plastics business owner. And he had a really nice life. He would kind of show up at the office around 10 or 10:30. He would sign some paperwork that his admin, his secretary, gave him. He would go do a long lunch with whoever he needed to meet with. And then he would tinker in the die shop for, maybe a couple of hours, working on his improved carburetor, because he was always convinced that there was a better, more efficient carburetor waiting to be invented. And then he would go home and swim in his pool. Yeah. And I always looked at that and thought, okay, that's when you've made it. That's when you're done, right? He's not one of those internet billionaires, right? Nobody will ever know his name unless you happen to be in the plastics industry down in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. But that kind of life where, I have a team that's doing all of these things, so it doesn't have to be me doing all the work, that became more attractive. And that is when I made the deliberate switch. I did a couple of startups, including a startup consulting company here in Seattle, and did that for 2 years, then went over to Smartsheet, which many of us here in Seattle will recognize as another Bellevue headquartered company. and built out their developer relations team and built out a development team working on one of the premium apps that sits on top of the Smartsheet API. And then after about 2 years there, decided I wanted to take on a different challenge. A buddy of mine at Quicken Loans asked if he could recruit me, and I said, yeah, sure, let's do it. And the CIO there and I get along very, very well. So I've now built out 2 different organizations, the technology culture team being the second one. And, you know, truthfully, it's a hell of a lot of work, but it's a hell of a lot of fun, particularly because now I get to sit back and watch my team go off and do some great things, as opposed to it, instead of me being on the stage, it's others who are on the stage and getting the kudos and the applause. And it's almost that parental feeling when you watch your kids do well.
Nice. And I think like thinking in those kinds of terms where if you're a manager that's doing it for your own attention or your own glory, you're probably not going to be a very popular manager.
You're not going to be very successful, much less popular.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, well, my favorite managers are the ones that honestly let other people lead or are training people to sort of own what they're doing and take responsibility for it. That to me is far more valuable, and it's probably much easier on you too, rather than having to oversee everything, right?
Well, in some ways, the hard part about making the transition from developer to manager really is the fact that you are making the same transition as player to coach. And in many ways, a lot of the managers who micromanage, I think, you know, there are always going to be those who are just, you know, pathologically incapable of trusting another human being, right? And those are the ones that you really think about when we think about micromanagers. But I think the vast more common case is the manager that looks at a particular task and says, if I give this to so-and-so, it's going to take them 5 hours. If I just do it myself, it'll take 2. So it's actually more efficient if I just do it myself. So I'll just go do that. The problem is it's the old adage, right? It's the old saying, you know, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, you feed him for life. You need to teach your team how to fish. And in many respects, to me, the best successes of a manager, of a leader, really, is not measured in what your team accomplishes while they report to you, but what they accomplish long after they've left your team, from the standpoint that if you have, I aim to improve my team members until the point that they are too senior to work for me anymore. I literally want to build that coaching tree that they talk about in sports leagues, so that, you know, if you look at like Andy Reid or Bill Walsh, both of them have had some very, very successful coaching trees, which tells you that they've been very successful in transferring whatever skills you have as a football coach to this next generation, who then have gone off and had success. If you look at Bill Belichick, who has been individually extremely successful as a coach, but all of his assistant coaches go off to a team, they're terrible, and then they come back to the Patriots. It's like, okay, Bill may be individually successful. He may have more Super Bowls than any other coach in history, but in terms of his legacy, he's not been nearly as successful. He's clearly not the greatest coach of all time. And people may argue with that as to which one is more important. But particularly in the technology space, if you think about the things that have that long-lasting impact, that coaching tree is what really matters long-term.
Sure. I am nodding along and pretending I understood all of those football references. And I hope
sports ball.
Yeah, sports teams, of course. But I do understand at least that much, and I think that is a wonderful way to look at the legacy of a leader and what kind of things that they are doing from there. I think we've covered a lot of the bases that I wanted to cover today. So, Ted, I want to give you an opportunity to do a shameless plug. It's a little thing we do where you get to talk about whatever kind of cause, or you can talk about your company. Really, the floor is yours. Go for it.
So I'll do a couple of things with this, right? Number one, I will shout out to my current employer, Quicken Loans, Rocket Mortgage. If you saw Tracy Morgan talking about being certain during the Super Bowl commercial, that's us. Best place to get a mortgage, I believe, Also, great place to work if you're a technologist. And if you're interested, would absolutely love to hear about it. Feel free to reach out to me or go to the Rocket Tech Careers page. I wouldn't be here in some respects if it hadn't been for some of the folks that I worked with at Smartsheet who connected us, Lee. So I, would want to give some love out to my friends and family that I still love over at Smartsheet. I'm very excited about the success that company has had. But the other thing that I will go on record as saying really is, as a developer, think very hard about what you will do for the next generation of developers. And I think you will find that as you get engaged with various activities like mentoring, as you get engaged with doing things, even around interviewing and whatnot, if you think about the fact that you're not training your replacement, you're actually growing this next generation, you will find that doing so grows you as much as it does them. So if you've never given much thought to the idea of being a mentor or being engaged in some of these various activities, whether it's at the local university, whether it's in one of the local boot camps, whether it's even spinning up a mentoring program inside your company, all of these are ways in which you can get connected. And frankly, it is vastly more rewarding from a career perspective, particularly because if you can demonstrate that you can connect with other people, that actually means you are much better skilled as a manager than you might have thought. And that path up the career ladder and all of the fame and fortune that comes with it is likely to be one that you can follow as well. So those are my 3 shout outs.
Wonderful. Ted, thank you so much for being part of the show and really sharing all of that wonderful wisdom. I think it's a great thing in a lot of ways when people are confronted with the possibility of change. And in your case, you've taken it on and really learned a lot from it. And I'm sure that a lot of the people that work for you on your team can testify to a lot of the things, a lot of the tokens of wisdom you've had too, right?
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope so.
Absolutely. I also want to thank everybody for watching or listening to this episode as well. You can check out more of our content on YouTube or on Spotify or other major podcasting apps. And lastly, if you want to learn a little bit more about what we do at Educative, you can visit us at educative.io. So for all of us here at Educative, thank you so much and happy learning. Bye-bye now.
Hope you enjoyed that. This episode is available on YouTube and also on many podcast platforms. If you'd like to be part of Educative Sessions, the form is open now to apply. You can also email me at lee@educative.io. Lastly, don't forget to like and comment this video and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more content. Thank you so much for watching and happy learning.